Welcome to Gen Z Hoops, the Gen Z basketball, coaching, and sports business show. On this podcast, you'll learn from professional players, coaches, and executives from all over the world and see the court in a brand new way. And now, joining you courtside, your Gen Z host, John Hartophilus.
Amit, my man, what's going on?
What's going on, John? Thanks for having me.
This is going to be a lot of fun. You've done a lot of stuff in such a short amount of time. I love having young people on this show that are really doing so much in the sports industry, that have done so many things. And you're one of those people that have done so many skill sets, has been to so many different places. This is going to be an eventful conversation, something I'm going to learn a lot from too. And I really can't wait.
I'm not that young, and I feel like 10 years really isn't a long time, but it is, and it feels like a long time. So granted, all the accomplishments, it's impressive. Even I look back at some of the things that I've been able to be a part of and go, holy cow, that really happened. Yeah,
no, definitely. But it's still just taking the value and everything and seeing that it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to dive into all of it now. And I'm sure everyone always asks you about what you're doing now in the college game, right? What are your past stops in the NBA and all this other cool stuff. I want to know about like young Amit, maybe like, teenage years, maybe a little before that. What made you fall in love with basketball? Because there's not everyone's built to have this 10-year plus career in the sports industry like you are. What makes you wake up every day and love what you're doing?
So let me start with teenage me, a terrible basketball player. Got a little better over time, played in high school, but, nothing crazy, never had a college or pro career or anything like that, like a lot of people in the business do these days. Teenage me, I'm trying to think. Teenage me was obsessed with video games and shoes and just not anything else really. Video games and shoes and playing basketball and just, game. I grew up in Chicago during the Jordan era, all 6 championships. I was like 5 or 6 when they got the first one, and I was 10 or 11 when they got to, by the time it was like, number 4, 5, and 6. So I was a very, very young person when all that stuff was going on. So that's really when I fell in love with basketball.
A lot of people that I've spoken to have had that similar experience of like the Jordan dynasty and seeing great teams like that really piquing their interest and getting them into the game. So that's so cool thinking about that. But obviously, right at some point, you started seeing it as something you could do every day, like your job, right? Did you do any managing before you got to? I know you were a GA at Yale, that's going to be a lot to dive into. But did you ever do any managing before that, or was that like a first when you got to college?
So let me catch you there again. So never was a manager in college, never was a GA at Yale. I went to graduate school there, but I had so for the longest time, I was ready to be a tenure track engineering professor. So I was a graduate student in chemical engineering.
That's so cool.
And at the time, the pendulum swung towards, let's start thinking about how data fits into this whole picture. And that was kind of my entry point into the business, because they were valuing some of that stuff more than before. They needed people who could process that information and speak basketball at the same time. So I kind of studied a little bit at a time and started to learn how to speak basketball out of data.
Okay, that's so cool. So what were maybe some of I've had people on the show like Dean Oliver, right? People like these pioneers, maybe in analytics or stuff like that, but not all of them come from the background. I mean, you come from a very unique background in the engineering space. So maybe what did that look like for you, that crossroads to really put 2 and 2 together?
Honestly, there's very little overlap at the time. I was just kind of a bored graduate student who was watching the late games, and when I would come home from the office. Because of that, I kept getting encouragement to say, hey, maybe you should go pursue something else. And I really took it to heart and said, you know what, maybe you're right. I left graduate school. I came back home to Chicago, worked a regular 9-to-5 job for a few years. But during those few years, I started building up connections to the Chicago Bulls organization, and was eventually put onto a data, basically before the NBA moved to all the machine learning and camera tracking. We were doing a lot of that stuff by hand. So we were measuring contested shots by hand. We were measuring, there's so many things you were just writing down on sheets of paper and putting into Excel. And this was like the entry point of all that stuff. And, mining play-by-play data was just a thing of our imagination at the time until it really became a thing. So that was really my first entry point into the business of basketball.
Those years, right, those early 2010s was a huge turning point in analytics, or obviously how we track data and how we space it. So tell us again, right, because I think that's so cool. Like you guys didn't have I know a lot of people like high school teams use like NOAA or like obviously Synergy and stuff like that to like track where the ball is, where players are, and they use that data. So you guys didn't have any of that. Like how would you guys make sure that you guys had all the data you needed?
It was really simple. We put it down. We put paper to pen. It was in the beginning stage. It was all paper to pen and Excel, and our data source was pause, rewind, and fast forwarding on the video stream.
That's so funny. Thinking about, right. I mean, that's something that, right. Everyone always thinks about, you need all this complicated software. You guys didn't have that. And you guys were just able to do all this stuff. Like thinking about, let's say me at the high school level doing this stuff. I use the same thing, pause, rewind, fast forward,
Right.
to make sure I'm doing all my stuff. That's so cool.
And we'd end up with game books about this thick after every game, and they would be left on, for whatever coaches wanted to look at or whatever staff wanted to look at the time. And there was a whole team of about 6 or 7 or 8 of us, each in charge of something different for a game.
So I know you were with the Bulls and the Knicks in that early period, but like, when did you start seeing, was it kind of when you started transitioning to college, you really started to see this stuff like really blow open, where you really were doing a lot more? Like, so for those that can't really see you on audio, you like, when you said how thick the book was, it was a thin book. It wasn't like a huge one. Like you might,
it wasn't like Coach Thibodeau's playbook would be, but it's definitely about 5 or 6 entire, box score game book files, type of things put together. It was a lot of stuff, honestly. And to do all that stuff by hand, and you think about, how good this and how accurate this tracking data is now, that does it without you even having to think about it. Like, you're like, holy cow, this has come a very long way.
Definitely. So then what was that next step like for you when you got to the University of Florida and you were a video coordinator there? I mean, was that maybe a lot of the same stuff you were doing beforehand, or like, were those kind of roles maybe overlap, or was there maybe some brand new stuff where now as the industry started changing, you were changing with it?
When I finished my time with Chicago, I had reached out to a lot of people, and the people I connected best with was the people at Florida. And I went down to their summer camp, and future supervisor at the time said, hey, we have this position, it's unpaid. And I said, well, I'm interested, and I'm happy to do it, because this is what I think this would be a great place to do it. Sure enough, a few months later, I'm moving to Gainesville and changed my position. They split one position into 2 with somebody I'm still in touch with today. But the roles had changed from, I was strictly track data, maybe watch a little video, into almost, as involved as I could be, which was figure out what our analytics program and what we valued as a staff and program, and on top of breaking down film, getting into coaches meetings, getting into scouting, and really learning. Like, that was I was a PhD student at one time in chemical engineering, but this was the start of what I say is my PhD in basketball. And I think people who are in this business for a long time will tell you there is no end, right? There's always something new going on, because coaches and basketball people are very smart people, and they're always trying to think of something new. Roles evolved into, like I said, scouting, breakdown video, a little bit on court stuff, a little bit, really just a jack of all trades, and getting a crash course in basketball. And there were very few better people to learn from than Coach Donovan and his group. Really successful group, really humble people.
So I love that you mentioned that whole idea of a PhD in basketball, because it's actually a phrase I've heard a couple of guests use in the past. A lot of a lot of the guys in the video room, NBA, NCAA, WNBA, you name it, they all use that same analogy because they learn so much from the video room. Like, how much has that prepared you for expanding that skill set even more? Like being in the video room, or all of the skills you've done, for originally not using any things like sports code, and now it's probably what you use every single day. Like, how has that maybe evolved you as a skill set?
Been a great vehicle for growth, I think. Just the technical stuff that we have available to us, as well as actually just watching and learning the game. The best teaching tool, and everybody who asks my opinion on this, the best teaching tool is just to go watch and watch and watch and watch as much basketball as you can. People who ask for my advice, I ask them, have you ever been to a basketball practice? Well, no. Well, you should go to as many of those as you can, because you really don't learn basketball until you're really around it 24/7, 365.
Definitely so. I mean, thinking about just this last month for me, I've been to a couple of these like USA basketball coaching clinics, stuff like that. I know you've worked with USA basketball in the past, or other events, right? And while being there, you meet a college coach from a nearby school, and they're like, oh, you can come visit our practice. Here's our schedule, and you can kind of see when their practice schedule is. Like, is that something? Like, how are you maybe seeing as much basketball as you could? Because obviously, right, everyone might look at your LinkedIn and say, okay, you were only at these places, but I would imagine you were learning from so many other different outlets.
One of the nice things about being at Florida was a lot of NBA, not that we had a bunch of NBA players while I was there, but we had a couple guys get a chance to play in the league, and a lot of NBA scouts would come through. So they would come hang out in the balcony where we would record our practices from. And from these conversations, you build a relationship, and then they connect you with other people on their staff. And suddenly you're reaching out to somebody saying like, hey, I'd really like to come by practice. And they say yay or nay. And more often than not, they're going to say yay. So having been to several NBA teams practices over, especially at the time before COVID, where they could allow people to be in there, were great learning tools. Like, I have notebooks full of stuff that I've learned, or teams, back when I was living in Florida, we had an Orlando summer league. So the teams would practice at all these different gyms. So if you have a relationship with somebody on these teams, say, hey, can I come stop by your practice? no problem. Drive out of the way. I've told other people this, and my wife thinks I'm crazy because I drive out of my way to go watch basketball practice.
So no, I mean, this is so cool thinking about how you're going to all these NBA practices, you're doing all these cool things, and you're really expanding your network and seeing the game in all these different ways and seeing how all these different coaches operate. So really like opening up to what you could do. But that's all in-person stuff. I mean, I'm sure, right, you're also doing a lot in the video room like you were. Using sources now that you maybe didn't have your first few years in the league or in college, like Sports Code, like Synergy. Like how did that avenue open things up for you now where for the last 5-6 years, it's all you've been using?
So it's been started this, we were all using DVD, right? DVD was one of the more common things that we would use, and editing film off of a DVD was really slow and tedious. When it moved to digital, which was probably like digital with MacBooks was in the mid 2000 early 2010s, I'd say, this stuff just became so much easier because now you don't have, everything, you can carry as much as you want with you. You don't really have to be connected to the internet all the time. You just have it with you at all times. So one, you have all your stuff with you. Two, it's so much easier to access anything as long as you have an internet connection, right? You can get on Synergy, you can get on YouTube, you can get on Second Spectrum, you can get on, Huddle or whatever it is, and break down to as much or as little detail as you please. So that helps when your coaches ask you for these really diamond in the rough type, or needle in a haystack is a better way to describe it. These needle in a haystack questions where you got to comb through, instead of combing through thousands of clips, you already know what to look for, like, and where to look for it, rather than having to comb through hundreds or thousands of clips to find that one or two or three instances of like particular pick and roll coverage they're looking for or something.
And that's exactly what you did when you got to Santa Clara. And I thought that was so cool. I'm sure people don't ask you, right? They think, okay, specialist to the head coach, like they might ask you about those duties, but you rebuilt their whole video room there and you installed a 32 terabyte server, which I think is super, super cool. It's a lot of storage for a lot of basketball right there. That's the library that they might still be using today, right? And all that stuff in terms of that library being that you don't have to comb through all those videos and things are tagged properly. What was that experience like for you in reshaping the video room of a team like that?
Great, because there were limited resources at a place like that. So we were really, scrambling to figure it out with whatever we had. And we were lucky that one of our managers' father was a pretty high ranking official at Western Digital, the company that makes all the hard drives itself. So he came by early in the season and said, hey, let me know anything you need hardware wise and we'll get it for you. So that ended up working out really well, because when I told him, I said, I need X, Y, and Z, he said, no problem. So we ended up being able to do it in large part because of that. We also had, a coaching staff that was very open to doing things a different way. And because of that, we were able to do it the way, basically I've carried this, what I learned at Florida kind of stuck with me throughout everywhere I've been. When you go on the road and you play against other teams, you see similar stuff. You're like, holy cow, this stuff is pretty universal now.
I'm sure, right, you've built such a network with people in your position and other teams and stuff. How have you maybe seen the whole landscape change over the last, let's say, 5 years to where now, right, you're starting to build these databases, but now everyone has a database. The playing field's kind of been leveled in a sense to where everyone's doing the same stuff. Like, how do you kind of still keep an advantage all these years later?
I think the biggest way to keep an advantage is to stay on top of things, right? We're probably allowed to say this. We're one of 2 or 3 college programs with Second Spectrum in our building, begged and pleaded with our league and other schools in our conference to adopt it, so that it makes all of our jobs easier. But I don't think everybody's really willing to, foot the bill on it, what a thing like Second Spectrum would cost. But like I said, we have a coaching staff that's very forward thinking here. And when I mentioned this to them and showed them what the power of this thing was and how much easier it would make our lives, 2 feet in, and said, the landscape is really moving in that direction. Camera tracking data, machine learning, because Second Spectrum has such a good reputation from its work in the NBA and really EPL soccer or whatever other soccer leagues they deal with. They've got a lot of stuff behind them. I think it's just a matter of time that hopefully the game evolves that way. I guess the competitive advantage will go to those that are adopted early, like us and a couple other places.
So cool, right? And then for those that don't know, you keep on, when you say here, you're talking about Clemson because you're now a video coordinator at Clemson University, a school that's maybe known for its football team, but the basketball program's on the rise right now. And right, what you're doing now with all this data is a huge part in making that happen on the court. What are you most excited about for maybe this season as it's kicking off and things are really kind of going in the right direction for you guys?
Curious to see. We've got like 6 or 7 new players, a couple older, a couple younger, and we're really curious to see how they mix in with our returning group. Our returning group has experienced a lot of success, and a lot of these guys came from places where they didn't experience a lot of success. So it'll be really interesting to see, exactly how this season plays out between, one, we play in the ACC, and it's probably the most challenging league to play in, given who you play against. Our schedule has done us no favors. We have home and homes with Duke and Virginia this year, so definitely not a favor there from the league. You're also playing against the best competition in basketball at this level, I think. So hopefully your players either get better from the competition they play against, or they get better internally just from the way we do things in practice and some of their own work.
I mean, incredible, right? Thinking about how this whole process takes place and what's maybe to come. I mean, what your role is behind the scenes and making that all happen. It's awesome thinking about, right, putting the ppieces together and laying the seeds and the foundation for a great video room that also leads to, right, a great product on the floor. It's just one of the many pieces of the puzzle.
It's interesting, right? We do all this technical stuff, and then it ultimately comes down to the guys who play on the court, right? The guys who make the passes, guys who take the shots, guys who run the plays, not the guys who draw the plays up or suggest the plays, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. That's obviously a huge part of it, and it's great thinking about how all these things come together in some way to produce that, which is really cool. But coming back to wrap things up, I really want to ask you, think about the journey you've taken and how far you've come from maybe being that engineering student that wasn't maybe entirely sure what field to go into or how this would tie into basketball. It obviously has for you. My younger cousin, to think of for an example, is really into basketball. He's pursuing engineering, doesn't quite know how to put the two together. What advice would you give to someone in that position, the way you were in this day and age in 2021? For them to have a similar career and have a similar success in basketball like you have?
I think there's got to be a level of curiosity along with interest in the subject, right? So if your cousin is not necessarily limited to your cousin, but whoever is interested and has that skill set, there are many, many things you can do. There are so many ways to create projects and make models, and if anybody with computer coding skills can figure stuff out like that. We had a couple students a few years ago do some computer modeling for us, and they did it completely pro bono, where, if they were doing this professionally, they'd probably be making a lot more money than me. The advice would be, if you really like it, then find a way to pursue it. There's always a need for people with these skill sets.
100%. Oh my God. I mean, there's so many ways to use it. It's all about actually going out and doing it and making sure that path is set for you. And you're a great testament to that. And it's incredible, right? Walking through your story and seeing all those different turns that it took. And obviously, right, you gave us a great breakdown into the industry, because I've had a lot of video coordinators, very few maybe lay the foundation for what the entire ecosystem of this whole thing looks like. So thank you so much, Amit, for coming on the show and sharing this with us, because this was a great episode. I'm definitely going to send it to my cousin for sure. Maybe awesome. Motivate him a little bit. And I appreciate you for sharing this with us. And this was a great episode. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, man.
Thanks for listening to Gen Z Hoops. Make sure to follow, like, and subscribe on Instagram, LinkedIn, and all major social media platforms at Gen Z Hoops. You can tune in and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and every other podcast platform on the planet. Get ready for the next episode.